I've chosen this coloured slide because I see where we are as kind of like the light is coming through. It's not quite as bright as we'd like it to be in the area of disability and inclusion, but we're on the right track, I think. Thanks. So what I'll be looking at today really quickly is some cultural changes, we are all kind of products of our environment, and how I have replicated those cultural changes in my life. Have a touch of the research, quick look at the research, and then then you can see what else we'll be doing. I don't need to read that out to you. Okay, so the sad story is the real story. So 50 or 60 years ago, things were really grim, such impoverished lives, and you know, that's just a snapshot. But what I call this stage in the lives of people with disabilities, ability apartheid, and I know it's provocative, but I'm also absolutely sure that the extent to which they were excluded was not dissimilar to black Africans. So it was such a strong culture of exclusion that children were being encouraged to leave, as Rhiannon said, their family homes at birth or at a young age. And so, you know, to capture this story, I'm always amused, or not amused, I'm kind of brought to tears by the fact that we'll sit in our lounge rooms and we'll watch those documentaries on Romanian orphanages about how they're treating their children with disability. In the next slide, we'll see that you know, with legislative changes, with advocacy groups, with lots of kind of things that were happening, there was a change in the way we viewed people with disability. Some of you might remember the Richmond report, you know, the recommendation that we close all the institutions because they were, you know, a violation of people's rights. So that, you know, that was kind of a springboard for lots of changes. We started to see group homes. We started to think of people with disability as being able to communicate, although it's not always verbally. And so, yeah, there were some positive changes, improvements in the way we described people. And we'll go to the next slide, and more recently, I'm always amazed that, you know, the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disability has been around for a long time. Australia only ratified it. We only became a signatory in 2008. And you probably already know this, so if you start kind of nodding off, I'll know, okay, I'm going over stuff you already know, I'll move on. Starting to move towards inclusive education. So when I first started teaching, I don't know for sure, but I would be guessing that the majority of children with disability were going to special ed schools, and I taught in some of them and I taught in mainstream as well. But now we're seeing, you know, only 10% of children attend special schools. So we're kind of on the right track, I think you would all agree. But we still got a very long way to go. You know that in terms of the poverty rates of people with disability, Australia has the worst record in all of the OECD countries, the worst. And yet we're sitting in a city that's regarded as one of the highest wellbeing status, and the country has just been, you know, we're celebrating those kind of wonderful stats, but, you know, we don't give this sort of statistic a lot of oxygen, and I would argue it's because it's discomforting, and we come from such a long history of people with disability occupying the shadows that it's going to take much more than a headline or two to kind of really bring those stats out to look at them and own them. Okay, thanks. And we could go, so you guys know all of this, so they're the kind of cultural shifts from exclusion towards inclusion. I don't think we're there yet. Disconnected towards connected, and you know this oft repeated phrase, you know, went from the doing to the doing for, and now we're doing with. And I think of it as, no, I won't go there. I've got to keep rushing. So I would like to tell you the story of Danny, who is my brother. And actually, we might go back to that. Yeah, sorry, Adrian, I'm giving you a hard task here. So I could just about retell Danny's story as the second youngest of my siblings in that kind of really short snapshot of the cultural changes. I'm ashamed and embarrassed to say. We didn't tie him to the toilet. We didn't do so just the kind of ways that we thought about Danny as a family member were similar to those cultural kind of messages that I've just rushed through. So, you know, when we turned 5 in our country town, Danny, we went off to school, Danny turned 5, and of course the very notion that he would go to the local school, like we all did, was inconceivable. I don't think it occurred to anybody. There were such strong cultural messages. Mum was encouraged to kind of have Danny move to Sydney to be in a children's home or an institution or whatever they were called, because he'd be so much better cared for and it would be better for the family. But she resisted that, and he remained in the family home until he was 18. So in those, when we were growing up, it was very much, we were in that doing to phase. That was the undercurrent of our relationship with Danny, my relationship with Danny. So I chose the games we played, I chose what he wore. I was so dictatorial in the way I was with Danny, and very much in the doing to phase. And when Danny, then due to all those sorts of factors that influence how we think, how we feel, what we do, you know, well, I probably shouldn't talk for my other siblings, but I certainly moved towards the kind of doing for. You know, I thought I'd really step up, and I was really amused with Alison's comment that people would remark on the, oh, you're so good, you're so good. And so I did get much more involved in Danny's life. And I did, you know, I'd go drive the 4 hours to pick him up from where he was living and come back, and, you know, we'd spend the weekend and people would say, you're so good, you're so good. And I thought, yeah, I am really, yeah. I was so ensconced in the cultural messages, you know, the helping big sister. And then, look, fortunately, it's not, I should have also given a snapshot of Danny. He is such an interesting person. It's hard to kind of give a profile of him, but he has autism. He has what's categorised as a severe intellectual disability, and he has epilepsy, and he communicates verbally, but probably, I don't know, what do other people understand? Maybe not much. Okay, so we understand about 80% of what he says. Other people understand not much. So he's a big character. He's a big character. And in the growing up years, we were so deficit-based in our thinking that, you know, he was described as someone who had, you know, significant behaviours. He was disruptive, he was non-compliant. You know, the language that we used was the language that we kind of inherited from the schools and from the community generally. The language I use now, of course, thankfully is very different. He's so characterful. He's possibly one of the most interesting people I know. He keeps me so honest. His crack detectors are better than anyone else's I know, and he will remind me when I'm being you know, an idiot in his very characterful way. So if Danny was standing here now, he would be, you wouldn't be able probably to hear me, because he would be giving his own story very loudly, very enthusiastically, and, you know, he does love to chat. So you've probably already guessed that several years ago, I had a light bulb moment, and when I was in this stage of kind of helping Danny, because he needed help because he had such a significant disability, you know, I was the one that was protecting the community from Danny. So I was wanting Danny to behave in ways that were appropriate so that other people wouldn't think ill of him. And so he'd spend his time with us, and it was like he was on some bloody behaviour management program with me, you know, with his big sister. And was it for Danny? No, I think it was for other people. And my light bulb moment was that the more I tried to kind of normalise Danny, the more I damaged my relationship with him, and the more I damaged his authenticity and affected his spunk and his light and his vibrancy. And so I essentially stopped doing it. And actually, that's not true. I'm his big sister. I'm always going to be bossy. But it's not with that undercurrent of, I need to protect the community from Danny. I I have the firm belief that the community is better off for having Danny in it, and that the more I can facilitate his contact with people that are not disabled, the better off they are. I'm so committed to the notion that everyone gains when we hang out with people with disability. It's not just for Danny. So a little story, an anecdote that kind of captures this change for us is that in the doing to, Danny was kind of like the invisible member of the family, you know. It was always awkward when we had these big gatherings. What to do with Danny? What are we going to do with Danny? It was always the big challenge. But so not that long ago, maybe 18 months ago, this kind of distant cousin, she got a PhD and she wanted to have a party, and she didn't, you know, she didn't have all that much to do with the family, but we were invited, and you know, so now Danny's in our lives in the way that we are in each other's lives, and so I make sure he's always included. So I say to Erica, you know, so Danny's with us that weekend, so is it okay if he comes? And it's always cute, you get this, sure. Okay, sure. And then it's kind of like you see them thinking, oh, I don't want to be, you know, a discriminatory whatever. I better be really, really enthusiastic. Yes, bring him along, she says. So we come. Now, we go to the party, and we had not seen some of these extended family members for years. So my grandmother had over 100 grandchildren, great-grandchildren, so it's pretty hard to keep in contact with all those people. So we didn't see that much of each other. But we arrive at the party. Danny plonks his stuff down at a table and, you know, sits on down and starts chatting to people where there's a space. And we, you know, join him and meet people who we hadn't seen for 15 years and had a wow of a time. The, you know, the dancing starts and, you know, that kind of, it might be just me, I don't know, but, you know, I find those things really awkward. So, you know, the fact that Danny's the icebreaker and you have to sit down kind of next to him is great, because you don't have to say, hi, my name's Maureen. Oh, Tracy, hi, Tracy. You kind of don't even have to do that awkward stuff because you're busy explaining what Danny's saying, and it's really good. It's a great icebreaker. The dancing starts, and, you know, just for Erica's sake, we get up on the dance floor and do our self-conscious dance, thinking, oh, God, when can I sit down again? Danny doesn't follow those rules. Danny gets up on the dance floor and starts dancing like a, you know, like a loon, you know. He's getting everybody singing, dancing, doing the whole thing. And other people come up and that's all right. They start dancing, and he, you know, he ups the energy, he ups the kind of, there's nothing ordinary about the way any of us were dancing, I can tell you. But people are having a really good time. The food stuff. So what this, I'm telling this story because it captures that move from exclusion to inclusion, and that everybody at that party, I think, had a better time because Danny was there. And so 40 years ago, he wouldn't have been invited. That's a fact. Even had I said, oh, look, Danny's with us for the weekend, can he come? Oh, look, I don't know if we're going to have enough seats. Who knows what the reason would have been. He wouldn't have been invited. You know, 20 years ago, he might have been invited, but I or my other family members would have done whatever it took to protect the other party goers. We would have, I'd have kind of G'd him up before, okay, Danny, we're going to be going and sitting over here, so we don't kind of, you know, disrupt people. And I would have got his, yes, Susie, I'm sorry to say that's what I would have done.
Susie says, do more dancing.
Yeah, the dancing thing, I can't do it, Susie. Won't do it to you. No one, that's not good for anyone. So, and I would have got what he was eating, I would have served up his meal. I would have participated in the exclusion, although we were present at the party. And so now we're in a stage and we're pushing the boundaries, and you know, we're doing with Danny, and he's a legitimate member of the family, and if there's something going on, he's invited. And that, for those who are still stuck back here, me and others are pushing that barrow and saying, well, Danny, what about Danny? Always, what about Danny? Thanks, Adrian. I'll stop banging on about that. And that party is not kind of an isolated experience. There are so many. If I had the time to tell the stories about how other people are better off for Danny being in their lives, that, you know, it's just, I could write a book. But I will stop because I've got to. Okay, look really quickly, can we have just a quick look at the research? Because I think it's interesting. So we know that they have the worst outcomes, don't we? Yep. And that people living in supported accommodation in 2006 had a life expectancy of 55. Why the hell is that not? Why don't we see those headlines? And that's not to diminish in any way the importance of addressing the life expectancy gap between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. I'm not diminishing that at all. That's such important work that we've done. And we have come a long way. We've come a long way in terms of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health and wellbeing and inclusion, as we have with the called community, culturally and linguistically diverse. But on the inclusion report card, people with disability and Australia and Canberra and our families and the streets, we are so far behind, so very far behind. And the need for inclusion, you people would know this, you know that it's now, isolation is now being compared to smoking in terms of the damage to not just our emotional well-being but our physical well-being. There was one report that compared isolation to I think it was 16 cigarettes a day and about 6 alcoholic drinks in terms of the damage done to your health. And so the exclusion of people with disability, I'm arguing, is having an impact on their health. It's not surprising that their life expectancy is so much lower than others. And yeah, even in terms of diabetes, you know, it's isolation has a greater impact than diabetes. So if you collect all the kind of information around inclusion and happiness, it can be summarised as the 3 S's: someone to love, something to look forward to, and something to do. And I just kind of think that those 3 S's should be like the Bible for building lives for people with disability, because they're just taken for granted for everyone else. But it just breaks my heart how many hours in how many days and weeks and months and years do people with disability living in supported accommodation sit waiting for something to happen, something to do, something to look forward to. So the connection between their life expectancy, their health, their well-being, and the inclusion of them, I think, is high, you know, a high correlation. And Tim Costello, who, you know, I just think is the bee's knees and Mozzie's cozzies, I heard him being interviewed on the radio one day and he said, where we sit determines what we see. Now, that's true, literally, you know. You think you've got every bean from the bush and there's not a bean left, and you go inside and someone else goes out and gets another bucket full of beans. So they were looking at the bush differently. So literally it's true. This person is seeing a very different game to the person sitting down here in the soccer analogy. But I'm talking about it today in terms of the metaphor of where we sit determining what we see. And I think that siblings have sat in the back rows for far too long. And we can go on to the next slide, I think, because I won't go on to. And I want to really quickly look at why. I think siblings of people with disability have sat in the back rows because, well, really it's the parents' gig. You know, mum or dad have all of this kind of, the life of the person with the disability sorted, so I'll kind of stay out. So I'm calling that parent-induced. So the parent is driving that back row positioning. Or it can be us. It can be the way we think. I'm not going there. I don't know. No, it's not my gig. And just to pop back to the parent-induced notion again, briefly, I think a lot of parents have this thought that they don't want to burden their sons and daughters who don't have a disability. And so they will do whatever they can to kind of protect them, a bit like me protecting the community from Danny. And I'll tell you really quickly, many years ago I had a conversation with Mum, because Danny was living in this kind of either a huge group home or a mini institution, whatever it was, before his life changed for the better. And I said to her, Mum, you do know, don't you, that if something happens with Danny or the people who are supporting him, of course you can come live with us, and I'll step in, and if you're not around, I was talking about, and of course I would do that, and I assumed that Mum knew that, but I thought, I better tell her, and Mum burst into tears, and she kind of cried for about 3 days because she had assumed that she didn't want her sons and daughters to be burdened by Danny, and I had assumed, of course, I would want to be a part of creating a good life for Danny. But we didn't talk about it. We kind of made these assumptions that were incorrect.